I met Daniel Reed on a Thursday that smelled like rain and coffee. I remember that detail because everything about that day felt ordinary, the kind of ordinary you don't realize is sacred until it's gone. The cafe on 3rd Street was half empty, the windows fogged from the sudden October storm. I was sitting alone with my laptop, pretending to write and actually rereading the same sentence over and over again. And then he asked, "Is this seat taken?" His voice wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. But something in it felt steady, like a hand reaching out without forcing you to grab it. I looked up. He had tired blue eyes, the kind that looked like they'd seen loss but refused to surrender to it. Dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. A navy sweater damp at the shoulders from the rain. "It is now," I said before my nerves could stop me. He smiled. That was the first thing I fell in love with, his smile. Not because it was perfect, but because it looked earned. We talked about nothing at first. Weather. Bad coffee. The book I was pretending to read. He noticed I kept flipping the same page. "You're not really reading that, are you?" he asked. I laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who does the same thing." He told me he was an architect. That he believed buildings should feel like they're listening to you. I told him I photographed abandoned places because I liked stories that lingered. "Maybe that's why we're here," he said softly. "To people who don't like things unfinished." There are moments in life when something shifts quietly inside you, like a door unlocking. That was mine. We didn't exchange numbers that night. He walked me to my car. The rain had slowed to a mist. Streetlights shimmered against wet pavement. "See you around?" he asked. I don't know why, but I answered with certainty. "Yeah. You will." And I did. 3 days later, same cafe. Same table. He was already sitting there. "I had a feeling," he said. So did I. After that, it became ours. Thursday nights. 2 coffees. One conversation that never seemed to end. He told me about his younger sister, Emily, and how he used to read her bedtime stories when their parents were fighting. I told him about my fear of becoming invisible, of building a life no one would truly see. "You're not invisible," he said once, brushing his thumb gently across my wrist as if testing whether I was real. "You feel like Sonrise." No one had ever said something like that to me before. When he kissed me for the first time, it wasn't rushed. It was slow and questioning. Like he was asking permission with every breath. "Are you sure?" he whispered against my lips. I nodded. I had never been more sure of anything. The world felt warmer after that. Colors sharper. Air sweeter. We cooked together in my tiny apartment kitchen, dancing around each other between the stove and sink. He burned the garlic once and blamed me for distracting him. "You're impossible," he teased. "And yet, here you are," I replied. Sunday mornings meant tangled sheets and sunlight spilling across his shoulders. I used to trace the lines of his back with my fingertips, memorizing him like he might disappear if I didn't. "Why are you looking at me like that?" he'd murmur. "Like what?" "Like I'm already gone." I would shake my head. "You're not." But love has a strange instinct. It senses fragility even in perfect moments. One night, weeks later, we lay on the rooftop of his apartment building, watching the city pulse beneath us. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Of what?" "That this is too good. That something beautiful always comes with a cost." He turned toward me, his expression serious now. Then let me pay it. I laughed softly. You don't even know what it is. I don't care. That was Daniel. All in. He loved like falling forward, without checking how far the ground was. And I loved him for it. When we said, I love you, for the first time, it wasn't dramatic. We were brushing our teeth. He looked at me in the mirror and said it simply, like stating a fact he'd just confirmed. I love you, Ava. My heart stuttered. I spit out toothpaste, turned to face him. You do. He rolled his eyes gently. You sound surprised. My voice trembled. I didn't know if I was allowed to be this happy. He cupped my face, mint and warmth and steady hands. You are. So I let myself believe him. If you had asked me then what love looked like, I would have described small things. The way he texted me, home safe, every night. The way he listened, really listened, when I talked about my dreams. The way his hand searched for mine automatically, like it belonged there. We were building something. Slowly. Carefully. And I thought, foolishly, beautifully, that nothing could break it. I didn't know yet that love can be the brightest right before it begins to dim. But in those early days, when we fell, it felt infinite. And if I close my eyes now, I can still feel the warmth of that Thursday. The rain. The coffee. And the moment my life quietly changed forever. It started with the quiet. Not the kind that fills a room when no one is speaking. The kind that settles inside you. The kind that replaces laughter before you even notice it's gone. At first, I blamed the weather. Winter came early that year. The sky over Boston turned a permanent shade of grey, like someone had smudged charcoal across it and forgotten how to wipe it clean. Daniel said I always got softer in winter, slower, more thoughtful. But this was different. I was tired. Not sleepy. Tired in my bones. Tired in my chest. Like someone had replaced my blood with something heavier. You've been staring at that screen for 10 minutes, Daniel said one night from the kitchen. You okay? I forced a smile. Just thinking. About? I didn't know. That was the problem. I used to wake up with ideas racing through me, photographs I wanted to take, places I wanted to explore. Now I woke up with a strange emptiness pressing against my ribs. Daniel noticed before I did. He started watching me the way you watch something fragile. You're not eating much, he said gently one evening, pushing a plate toward me. I'm not that hungry. You used to fight me for the last piece of garlic bread. I'm evolving, I joked weakly. But even my jokes sounded distant. The first time he looked afraid was the night I forgot where I'd parked my car. We had gone to the grocery store. I stood in the freezing parking lot, blinking at rows of identical vehicles. I swear it was right here, I murmured. Daniel squeezed my hand. It's okay. We'll find it. But his voice carried something new. Concern. And beneath that, panic. I started losing things. My keys. My train of thought. Words in the middle of sentences. Once, I forgot the name of the cafe where we met. Daniel went still. Ava, he said quietly, that's our place. I laughed it off. I'm just distracted. But later that night, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried without understanding why. It felt like pieces of me were slipping through invisible cracks. And no matter how tightly I tried to hold on, I couldn't stop it. Daniel tried to stay steady. He researched late into the night when he thought I was asleep. I could see the glow of his phone under the covers. "You need rest," he'd whisper. "You need sleep," I'd whisper back. He began scheduling doctor appointments, sitting beside me in sterile white rooms, answering questions I struggled to process. "When did the fatigue begin? How often do you feel disoriented? Any family history of neurological conditions?" Neurological? The word echoed. I watched Daniel's jaw tighten every time it was mentioned. The tests came back inconclusive at first. "Stress," one doctor suggested. "Burnout," said another. I wanted to believe them. But something inside me knew. I could feel myself fading. Not dramatically. Gradually. Like a photograph left too long in the sun. The worst part wasn't the exhaustion. It was Daniel's eyes. He tried to hide it, but I could see the calculation happening behind them. What if this gets worse? What if she forgets me? One evening, as we lay in bed, I turned toward him. "Would you still love me?" I asked softly, "if I wasn't me anymore?" He didn't hesitate. "There is no version of you I wouldn't love." "But what if I don't remember us?" His breathing changed. "Then I'll remember for both of us." I pressed my face into his chest and let his heartbeat steady me. But fear had already rooted itself between us. Not fear of each other. Fear of time. The turning point came on a Sunday. We were making pancakes. Daniel was humming off-key. The kitchen smelled like butter and maple syrup. And suddenly, everything tilted. The walls blurred. The sound of the spatula hitting the pan became distant. "Ava." I tried to answer, but my tongue felt foreign. The next thing I remember was the floor against my cheek. Daniel's voice breaking. "Stay with me. Stay with me." The hospital lights were too bright. I hated how small I felt in that bed. Daniel sat beside me, gripping my hand so tightly it almost hurt. The neurologist spoke carefully. Too carefully. "There are abnormalities in the scans." Daniel stiffened. "What kind of abnormalities?" he asked. The doctor hesitated. "We need more tests." "But there are signs of early degenerative changes." Degenerative. I watched the word land on Daniel's face like a physical blow. "What does that mean?" I whispered. "It means," the doctor said gently, "we need to prepare for progression." Progression. As if my life was something marching forward without asking permission. On the drive home, Daniel didn't turn on the radio. He kept one hand on the wheel and the other on my knee. "I'm not going anywhere," he said suddenly. "I know." "No," he insisted, his voice trembling. "I mean it. Whatever this is. However long. I'm here." I believed him. But I also saw the cracks forming. Love is powerful. But illness is relentless. And somewhere between doctor visits and quiet tears in the dark, I felt myself slipping further away, not just from the world, but from him. And the worst part? I could see how desperately he was trying to hold on to the glow I was slowly losing. Daniel stopped sleeping. At least, that's what it looked like. I would wake up at 3 in the morning to find his side of the bed empty, the sheets cold where he should have been. Sometimes I found him on the couch, laptop open but untouched. Sometimes he stood at the window, staring out at the city as if daring it to explain itself. "Come back to bed," I'd whisper. In a minute, he'd answer. But the minute never came. Something in him had shifted after the diagnosis. Not his love. That remained, fierce and almost defiant. It was everything else that changed. He became quieter. More watchful. Like a soldier waiting for an attack no one else could see. I hated that look in his eyes. It made me feel like I was already disappearing. One afternoon, I found him sitting at our cafe, our table, with a notebook full of scribbled medical terms. Neuroplasticity, he muttered under his breath. Experimental trials. Cognitive retention studies. Daniel, I said gently, sitting across from him. You don't have to solve this. His jaw tightened. Yes. I do. You can't fight biology with stubbornness. Watch me. There was a sharpness in his voice I'd never heard before. He wasn't angry at me. He was angry at the universe. At the randomness. At the cruelty of something stealing pieces of me while he stood there powerless. I reached across the table and touched his hand. You're scaring me. His expression softened instantly. I'm sorry, he breathed. I need to do something. You are doing something. You're here. But being here wasn't enough for him. Daniel had always been a builder. A man who fixed cracks in walls and foundations. A man who believed everything broken had a blueprint for repair. Now he was facing something with no blueprint. And it was unraveling him. He stopped seeing friends. Stopped answering calls. When his sister Emily showed up one evening with takeout, she pulled me aside in the hallway. He looks different, she whispered. I know. Has he talked to anyone? He talks to me. But even that wasn't entirely true anymore. Daniel didn't talk about how afraid he was. He carried it. Silently. Like a weight strapped to his ribs. The night I forgot his birthday was the night something inside him cracked. We had always made a ritual of it, cake at midnight, a handwritten letter, a slow dance in the kitchen. That morning, I woke up and kissed his cheek. Morning, I smiled. He waited. I could see it, the hope flickering. But my mind was blank. He swallowed. Do you know what today is? He asked softly. I searched his face. Thursday? October? The silence stretched too long. His eyes dimmed in a way that will haunt me forever. It's okay, he said quickly. Too quickly. It's nothing. And that was worse than anger. That was surrender trying to disguise itself as understanding. Later that night, I found him in the bathroom, gripping the sink. I'm losing you, he whispered, not realizing I was standing there. My chest tightened. I'm still here, I said. He looked up at me in the mirror. You don't see it, do you? See what? That every time you forget something, it feels like a door closing. And I don't know how many doors we have left. His voice broke. I walked toward him slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. I'm scared too. He let out a shaky breath. But you don't get to fall apart, I continued. Not completely. I need you steady. He laughed bitterly. I'm trying. And he was. But trying was tearing him apart. I began noticing the small fractures. He would lose track of conversations. Forget meetings at work. Once, he drove past our apartment 3 times before realizing it. You okay? I asked when he finally came inside, pale and shaken. Yeah, he lied. But love makes you sensitive to tremors. His hands started trembling when he thought I wasn't looking. He kept lists everywhere, on the fridge, in his wallet, on his phone. Medications, appointments, research centers. He was trying to outpace the inevitable. And it was exhausting him. One night, I woke to find him sitting beside me, watching me sleep. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I murmured. "Because I'm memorizing you," he said quietly. The words sliced through me. "I'm not gone yet." "I know." His thumb brushed my cheek. "But if the day comes when you don't remember me, I need to remember everything. The way you breathe. The way you frown when you're thinking. The way you say my name." Tears slipped down my temples into my hair. "Daniel, I won't let this take you," he whispered. But his voice no longer sounded certain. It sounded desperate. His silence began speaking louder than his words. In the spaces between sentences. In the way he held me too tightly. In the way he stared at nothing, calculating battles he didn't know how to fight. I could see him breaking. And somehow, that hurt more than the fading inside my own mind. Because even as I slipped further from myself, he refused to let go. He loved me like a man standing in rising water, refusing to swim to shore without the person who might already be drifting away. And I didn't know which terrified me more. The thought of forgetting him. Or the thought of what this fight was turning him into. The truth did not arrive gently. It came the way most devastating things do, in fragments. A missed detail. A second opinion. A question that wouldn't stop echoing in Daniel's mind. It started with a name. Dr. Keller. He was the neurologist who had first reviewed my scans. Calm voice. Careful wording. The kind of doctor who spoke in softened probabilities instead of certainties. Degenerative markers, he had said. Early progression. But Daniel couldn't let go of something. "The pattern doesn't match," he muttered one night, spreading my medical files across the dining table. I watched him from the couch, exhaustion wrapping around me like fog. "What doesn't match?" I asked. He tapped the scans with his finger. "The deterioration is too fast. And then it plateaus. That's not typical. Maybe I'm just special," I tried to joke. He didn't smile. That's when I knew this wasn't obsession anymore. This was instinct. He requested copies of everything: imaging, blood work, neurological assessments. He called specialists outside the state. Sent emails at 3 in the morning. Attached files. Wrote long explanations. Most didn't respond. But one did. A researcher in Chicago. Daniel didn't tell me at first. He didn't want to give me false hope. But I saw the shift in him, not lighter, not yet, but sharpened. Purpose replacing panic. "We are going somewhere tomorrow," he said one evening. "Where?" "To see someone who actually looked at your scans." I studied his face. "You don't trust Dr. Keller." His silence answered for him. The clinic in Chicago was colder than the hospital back home. Or maybe that was just my nerves. Dr. Harris was direct. She didn't soften her words. "These scans don't show degenerative disease," she said plainly. Daniel went completely still. "What do they show?" he asked. She leaned forward. "They show inflammation. Significant neural inflammation. Possibly autoimmune. Possibly triggered." Triggered. Triggered by what? I whispered. Environmental factors, severe stress, or exposure to certain compounds. Daniel's hand tightened around mine. This is treatable? He asked. Yes, she said. With the right intervention. The room felt like it tilted, but in a different way this time. Not falling. Shifting. Then why? Daniel asked slowly. Were we told it was degenerative? Dr. Harris hesitated. I can't speak for another physician. But this presentation doesn't justify that conclusion. On the flight home, Daniel didn't speak much. But his silence was different. It wasn't grief. It was fury. When we landed, he drove straight to Dr. Keller's office without telling me. Daniel, I need answers. The confrontation was not loud. It was worse. Controlled. Precise. You told us she was deteriorating, Daniel said evenly, placing the new report on the desk. Dr. Keller adjusted his glasses. The symptoms aligned with. They didn't, Daniel cut in. You didn't run the full autoimmune panel. A pause. It wasn't standard protocol. Because you assumed. There it was. Assumption. A word that had nearly rewritten my future. Dr. Keller shifted in his seat. In early cases, we must prepare patients for worst-case scenarios. You prepared her to lose her mind, Daniel said, voice tightening. You prepared us to mourn something that wasn't even fully diagnosed. The air in the room felt electric. I had never seen Daniel like this. Not loud. Not reckless. But unyielding. You took time from us, he continued. You took certainty. You took hope. Dr. Keller's composure faltered. I acted in good faith. Daniel leaned forward. Good faith isn't enough when you're holding someone's future. We left without another word. In the parking lot, I grabbed his arm. Daniel, stop. He turned toward me, chest rising and falling hard. I thought I was watching you disappear, he said hoarsely. I thought I was losing you piece by piece. I know. And it might not have been that at all. I cupped his face. You were fighting for me. He closed his eyes. No, I was preparing to survive you. That confession shattered something inside me. All those nights he stayed awake. All those lists. All that quiet devastation. He wasn't just trying to save me. He was bracing himself for a life without me. Treatment began 2 weeks later. Steroids. Immunotherapy. Strict monitoring. The side effects were brutal. Headaches. Nausea. Mood swings that made me feel like I was living inside a storm cloud. But something remarkable happened. The fog began to lift. Small things returned first. The name of our cafe. The way Daniel's laugh sounded when he tried to sing in the shower. Then bigger things. Memories that had felt distant snapped back into focus. I watched Daniel watching me. Hope is a fragile thing after it's been broken. He didn't celebrate. Not yet. He moved carefully. Like stepping onto thin ice. One night, I found him sitting at the kitchen table again. But this time, there were no frantic notes. Just stillness. You were right, I said softly. About what? That something didn't fit. He looked up at me. I should have pushed sooner. You pushed when it mattered. He stood and walked toward me slowly. I will never let someone take your future again, he said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was a wow. And in that moment, I understood something. What had been taken from us wasn't just time. It was innocence. The belief that love alone was enough to protect us. But in its place, something stronger had formed. Not blind devotion. Not naive hope. Resolve. Daniel had uncovered the truth. And in doing so, he had crossed a line. He was no longer just the man who loved me. He was the man who would go to war for me. And love like that changes everything. Recovery is not a straight line. No one tells you that. They celebrate the diagnosis correction. They celebrate the treatment plan. They celebrate the word asterisk reversible asterisk like it's a guarantee. But healing is messy. And Daniel changed in the waiting. The medications steadied my mind, but they shook my body. I gained weight from the steroids. My hands trembled. Some mornings I woke up drenched in sweat, heart racing for no reason at all. Daniel tracked everything. Symptoms. Dosages. Side effects. He built spreadsheets the way he used to design buildings, precise, calculated, airtight. But he stopped designing anything else. His drafting table gathered dust. "Did you go into the office today?" I asked one afternoon. He didn't look up from his laptop. "I worked from home." "You've been working from home for 3 weeks. I'm managing." But managing wasn't living. I began to see what this fight had cost him. The easy laughter was rarer. The spontaneous road trips disappeared. He watched me constantly, not in a suffocating way, but in a vigilant one. Like a guard who had seen the enemy once and refused to ever be surprised again. One evening, I stood in the doorway of his office and just looked at him. His shoulders were broader somehow. Not physically. Emotionally. Weighted. "You don't have to carry all of this alone," I said. He gave me a tired smile. "I'm not alone. That's not what I mean." He closed the laptop slowly. "I almost lost you." "You didn't." "But I thought I did." His voice tightened. "Do you understand what that does to someone?" I did. Because I had watched it happen. He had gone from a man in love to a man on a mission. Love had sharpened him. It had stripped away softness in places and replaced it with steel. The night I found him throwing away a stack of medical bills was the night I realized how deep it ran. "We can handle those," I said. "It's not about the money," he snapped. The word hung between us. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry. I should have protected you better." "From what?" "A misdiagnosis?" "Biology?" "The universe?" "From everything." I walked toward him and placed my hands on his chest. "You're not God, Daniel." "No," he agreed quietly. "But I'm the man who loves you. And that's supposed to mean something." "It does." He shook his head. "It means I don't get to be naive anymore." That was it. The innocence we had once shared, the rooftop confessions, the easy certainty, was gone. In its place stood a man who read medical journals for fun. A man who challenged doctors without flinching. A man who no longer assumed the world would be kind. But he was also gentler in ways I hadn't expected. He brushed my hair back when the headaches hit. He learned how to cook anti-inflammatory meals. He held me during mood swings without taking the sharp edges personally. "You're allowed to be angry," he would whisper when I lashed out at nothing. "I'm not angry at you. I know. He absorbed the storm without trying to control it. That's when I realized love hadn't just hardened him. It had deepened him. There's a difference. One night, months into treatment, we returned to the rooftop of his apartment building. The same place where I once told him I was afraid beauty always came with a cost. The city lights shimmered below. You were right, I said quietly. About what? That love has a price. He looked at me, older somehow. And I'd still pay it. He studied my face as if confirming I was fully there. You're clearer now, he said softly. I feel clearer. Do you remember everything? I smiled faintly. I remember a rainy Thursday. I remember bad coffee. I remember a man who asked if a seat was taken. His throat moved as he swallowed. That man didn't know what he was signing up for. No, I agreed. But he stayed anyway. Daniel leaned back on his hands, looking out over the city. I used to believe love was about building something beautiful, he said. Now I think it's about defending it. I considered that. And what does that make you? I asked. He thought for a long time. Someone who isn't afraid anymore. That wasn't entirely true. He was still afraid. But he no longer let fear dictate him. He had faced the possibility of losing me. He had stared it down. And instead of running, he had transformed. Not into someone colder, but into someone braver. The man he became was quieter, more deliberate, less trusting of easy answers. But his love? It was no longer just warmth. It was endurance. And endurance leaves marks. Sometimes I would catch him looking at me with an intensity that felt almost painful. What? I'd ask. Nothing, he'd say. But I knew what he was thinking. We survived. And survival changes you. Love had lifted him, given him purpose, sharpened his instincts, revealed his strength. But it had also scarred him. There are lines around his eyes now that weren't there before. There's a caution in his joy. A hesitancy before celebration. Because once you've almost lost everything, you understand how fragile everything is. And yet, if you ask me whether he regrets it, whether he regrets loving me through the storm, I know the answer. I see it in the way his hand still searches for mine automatically. In the way he still texts, home safe. In the way he still looks at me like sunrise. He is not the same man who asked to sit at my table. He is stronger, sadder, wiser, and fiercely, irrevocably devoted. Love remade him. And in the process, it remade us. There is a quiet that comes after survival. It isn't the empty kind. It's the earned kind. The kind that settles into your bones and asks, asterisk now what? Asterisk. A year after the worst of it, Daniel and I sat in the same cafe where we met. Same table. Same corner window. Different people. The rain tapped gently against the glass, almost ceremonially. Full circle, he murmured. I wrapped my hands around my coffee and studied him. He still had those tired blue eyes. But they weren't tired in the same way anymore. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were aware of it. And awareness is heavier. Do you ever think about it? I asked. About what? The version of us where the diagnosis was right. He didn't answer immediately. I used to, he admitted. Every day. And now? Now I think about the version where I didn't fight hard enough. I reached across the table. You fought. I know. He gave me a small smile. But loving someone means you'll always wonder if you could have done more. That's the part no one tells you. Love doesn't erase fear. It magnifies it. Because once you know what it feels like to almost lose someone, every ordinary day becomes sacred. But also terrifying. I still have checkups. Still take medication. Still wake up some mornings with a flicker of panic when I can't immediately remember what day it is. Healing didn't mean returning to who I was. It meant becoming someone new. And Daniel had to fall in love with that version too. There were nights, after everything stabilized, when I caught him watching me with a softness that almost hurt. What? I would ask. I'm just grateful. For what? For today. Today. It sounds so small. But after you've stared down the possibility of forgetting your own life, today is everything. One evening, back on the rooftop, I asked him something I'd been holding inside. Did you ever resent me? He looked stunned. Resent you? For what it did to you? For what you had to become? He was quiet for a long time. I resented the fear, he said finally. I resented the waiting. I resented the doctors who didn't look close enough. He stepped closer. But I never resented loving you. The wine lifted my hair, carrying the city's distant hum between us. Even when it hurt. I whispered. He cupped my face gently. Especially then. I didn't understand at first. But over time, I did. Love that never hurts is love that never risks anything. What we went through carved something into us. It taught us that promises are fragile. That health is fragile. That memory is fragile. But it also taught us that devotion can be stubborn. That two people can stand in uncertainty and choose each other anyway. Months later, Daniel proposed. Not with fireworks. Not with a crowd. Just the two of us in our kitchen. I don't want a life where I'm constantly afraid of losing you, he said, holding the ring with hands that no longer trembled. I want a life where, no matter what happens, we face it already chosen. I laughed through tears. You already chose me. Then let me keep choosing you. So I said yes. Not because the future was guaranteed. But because it wasn't. We married in early spring. Simple ceremony. Close friends. Emily crying in the front row. When Daniel said his voice broke only once. I promise, he said, looking directly at me, that if the world ever tries to take pieces of you again, I will fight for every single one. And when it was my turn, I didn't promise him perfection. I didn't promise him health. I promised him presence. I promise, I said, to stay. Even when staying hurts. Because that's the truth no one puts in greeting cards. Love hurts. Not because it's wrong. But because it matters. There are still moments when fear brushes against us. A forgotten word. A delayed test result. A quiet pause that lasts a second too long. And every time, I see Daniel's jaw tighten just slightly. But now, instead of spiraling, he reaches for my hand. And I squeeze back. We don't pretend we are invincible anymore. We are not. We're human. Fragile. And fiercely devoted. If you had asked me on that rainy Thursday what love would cost, I wouldn't have known how to answer. Now I do. It costs comfort. It costs certainty. It costs the illusion that tomorrow belongs to you. But it gives you something extraordinary in return. It gives you someone who stands in the fire with you. Someone who memorizes your face in case the world tries to erase it. Someone who becomes stronger not in spite of the pain, but because of it. Daniel once told me I felt like Sunrise. He was wrong. Sunrise happens every day, predictable and automatic. What we have is rarer. It is the light that stays after the storm. The kind you fight for. The kind you almost lose. The kind that hurts. And is beautiful anyway. If love has taught me anything, it's this. The pain is proof that it's real. And I would choose it every single time.